Lincoln was very deeply educated in just a few things. The King James Bible, Shakespeare, and Euclid. And it's from Euclid he gets his argument against slavery.
Welcome to Classical Etc. You're in the studio with Memoria Press.
It's my ascot.
No, just the way you gotta
I'm back. All right. Hello, and welcome to another episode of Classical Etc. I'm Jessica Aboud, and we are the core four today. Martin, Tanya, and Paul. Good to have everybody.
Yes, we all weren't here last week.
No.
And I listened to it. I have a criticism.
Wait. We were all here except you last week.
That's exactly right. I said we all weren't here. Was that wrong? We weren't all here. We weren't all here.
We weren't all here.
I was not here. Ian was here. You talked about languages. You talked about the Vulgate, reading the Vulgate and using online sources. And nobody mentioned the Vulgate study guide that we have. I mean, you guys let me down.
You know,
all
I have
the
to say
time.
that as a co-founder of this company, I didn't even know we published that.
Okay, this is this is Lingua Biblica redone. But did you mention Lingua Biblica?
Oh, okay. So
no, you didn't.
So I authored Lingua Biblica. So
Yes,
I have a
you
program.
did.
I have a program published by my company that I am not aware of. That I wrote.
No. Well, no. This was the intent was to rewrite Lingua Biblica, and this became
a whole different
thing.
kind of course. But my point is, we have two courses: Lingua Biblica, which you did author and never mentioned in the last podcast.
I wasn't even.
And the
Martin
Vulgate.
thought that was no longer
published anymore. I never hear about it.
You were sending people to some kind of online resource instead of to Memoria Press to buy
But that
our
resource
study
does.
guides on the
You
Vulgate.
would use that resource with a program like this. You know, not
But
substitute. I would have
didn't
mentioned
even
this if I had known about it. If I'd known somebody stole my program.
You knew the whole time Alex was writing this. But anyway, we do have a Vulgate program that I think is very good, even though nobody else on this podcast seems to know that it exists. Maybe people would buy it if you would talk about it.
Next time.
Okay.
Next time. We stand
Okay.
corrected.
Yes.
That's funny. And Ian, too.
I was so
We're gonna have to go
disappointed.
to tell Ian.
Ian, too.
Isn't that his
Right.
job? He
Yes.
manages our...
It is
Okay,
his job.
to exempt Ian from the chastising that we're all getting, this was specifically in reference to Martin reading,
The Vulgate, yes.
but not just the Vulgate, but the daily readings that are according to the Anglican or Catholic Church calendar.
Yeah, that's it.
And which
Yes.
makes it difficult to go with a program like that's not following that kind of reading. And so I understand why this wouldn't be brought up, but I do think it would be a great help for somebody who doesn't mind going in a different order than the daily readings.
I would have mentioned it if I had known about it.
Maybe Martin will take it home and now he will go through that
Yes.
order instead of the daily readings.
I will pick up a copy.
Yes, and actually fill it in and let us know what you think.
Maybe let's go back to Lingua Biblica. Who's that author's
Or
name
you could
again?
do, yes. Well, that is also still being sold.
Wow, you
by
can't
us.
even remember your own name, Martin?
Ooh.
Well, we know what we're not reading. It's Martin's Vulgate work.
That's right.
But what are we
Yeah, could you
reading
move
these
this
days?
conversation
I'm
along
trying to get us
quickly?
out of the ditch. Okay. What is everybody reading? The summer is kind of closed out on us. So we're into the swing of fall.
I don't
No.
stop thinking it's summer until the weather gets cold.
Okay, can we focus on what we're reading? I finished The Hobbit this morning,
Did you?
and I'm halfway through The Human Factor, I think is what it's called, by Graham Greene.
I haven't read
I saw
that
Graham
one.
Greene, so I just started reading it.
Is
I think
it
it's called
good?
The Human Factor. It is good.
Mhm.
It's a spy novel,
Oh,
Ooh.
which I mean he does those political spy novels, and I mean so far so good. It's not nearly as funny as Our Man in Havana, but it's dealing with some like probably more like deeper topics. So yeah, it's enjoyable.
Can you remind me, what was the book you mentioned about the person who kind of went off the grid for a year? Do you remember
Oh,
that?
Better Off.
Better
Yeah, I
Off.
bought
Okay.
that.
Yeah.
Yes,
I've got it.
I forgot. I wrote it down. I'm going to write it down right now. Better Off.
I bought a lot of the things that we've talked about recently, and they're sitting on the shelf waiting. But in the summer, right in August, I shouldn't say in the summer because I've read some pretty big stuff this summer. Two huge books, Moby Dick and The Father's Tale.
Mhm.
But in August, right now, I am reading a British murder mystery. I just can't do anything else right now. But September's coming. Everyone will have their books in their classrooms. And we can breathe.
Mhm.
Breathe again.
What?
Well, we're waiting on a book from you.
I already said 2 books.
No, a book from you.
Oh, to be finished writing?
Yes.
It's done.
Is it done? You're
I
finished
handed
with your
everything in today.
Okay, well, obviously we're not going to have it for fall, are we?
Jessica was like, well, no, I mean, these are just tweaks. Like it's the whole thing's been there, been ready, except the answers for the quizzes, which Hayden wrote, and then I went through and
edited,
tweaked,
Mm-hmm.
and got all those to Jessica today. And then Jessica's like, there's an entire quiz answers missing, so I wrote those today. And
so she's got everything she needs.
yeah, I mean, I think, I mean, it hasn't gone through like the official proof, but the schools that need it, we will be sending it out very, very quickly.
And
soon.
is this a secret? What it is?
Oh no, this is the Intro to Classical Philosophy program,
Which
that's I've been working on for 6 years.
Yes. But here it is.
Yeah,
complete. Right at the end of
Fantastic.
the summer.
Perfect. Martin, what are you reading?
Well, I had to kind of lay some things aside because number one, Dan Scheffler and I are doing a foundations podcast for the college, Memory College, and we are doing it on the Iliad. And it's a little, these are short little thing, 15, 20 minute podcast basically on the Iliad. And so I realized I really had to go back and read the thing again. And so I've been doing that. I can't, I always think I'm going to take notes on whatever book I'm reading. And then the next time I have to talk about it, I can just go back to the notes.
You really can't.
You can't.
You can't.
The only purpose for notes is to impress on your mind at that point in time what you're doing, because you're thinking about it and then you're having to write it down so you can think through it again. But you can't. I can't do that. I've got to read it again. I got to get the gestalt of the thing in my head, and that goes for teaching online courses or whatever. I got to read the stuff again.
Yeah,
Otherwise I can't teach it.
Jeremy Breland was recently talking to some teachers about that, and he said, even though he's taught Anna Karenina so many years, he still has to reread it every year because you have to remember all the minutia, all the detail that that your students are experiencing right now.
And that's the nice thing about teaching is that because if you're like teaching that on some kind of regular basis, you have to go back to it again and again and
you
again,
really
and
know
hopefully
it.
get to know it better.
So
every time.
what translation did you choose?
Well, okay, I am just using right now, just as a review, Joseph Church's. I think it was called originally when it came out, The Iliad for Boys. And but it's actually
you mean
very
Alfred
good.
Church?
I'm sorry, I did mean Alfred Church.
Okay.
I think it's Alfred J. Church or
something like that.
Yeah, and it's actually very well written.
Yeah.
So it tells the story really well. It's not the original, but it tells the story. But I just, I thought that would be good particularly for review of it. And then I'm also having to read The Idiot because I'm working on a book of my essays that
I
hopefully will
wondered
come
why
out
you'd
this year.
written Idiot Iliad down.
Yes.
I've been puzzling over that.
Okay. Yeah. But I've got an article I want to include that I've never published, and I have given it as a speech a couple times called Tolstoy versus Dostoevsky. Because there is kind of a difference of opinion.
There is.
Particularly among classical educators about this. And I sort of consider myself sort of on the Tolstoy side on a lot of issues, but they both have just a lot of value to reading them, but they are very different. Well, I won't go into it, but in any case, I realized I think I'd started The Idiot a couple of times. And Dostoevsky, that's one of his 3 or 4 great works. And I had read Crime and Punishment. I had read Brothers Karamazov. I had read Notes from Underground. but I had not finished The Idiot. So I thought I really need to finish that book, and it'll bring Dostoevsky back to my mind again, and it'll make it easier for me to complete that longer article. Yeah.
Wonderful. Well,
yes.
Let us know how it goes.
Yep.
This is a part of the show where we usually do a listener question, but we are saving those up for a mailbag episode that we're going to do in a few weeks, where we just answer a bunch of your questions all at once. And if you do have questions, don't forget, email podcast@memoriapress.com, and we will answer those on the air. We will save them up and get to them in a few weeks. But on to the topic at hand today. Let's dive in. Martin, you recently wrote an article in our Classical Teacher magazine titled The Classical Education of the Founding Fathers. And in it, you argue that their remarkable political achievements were not just a result of their talent or their opportunity, but you describe their very specific education that was steeped in the classics. So we want to talk about your article today, The Education of the Founding Fathers.
Yeah, and unfortunately, I didn't read this before the show like I do the Iliad, and so I don't know much about it. So
We'll
wrote
remind
it.
you.
yeah,
But
it's
you also
true of my
wrote-
own articles. I
you
have to
also
read them
wrote it.
again right before
Yeah.
I discuss them.
I know.
I'm just kidding, but yeah. So was that a question?
No, but I do want your help to just quickly frame up the conversation. Can you just briefly explain the education that they got? Take us back to a colonial grade school room. What would they have learned?
Well, there weren't a lot of grade schools at that time. As part of the thing about colonial America. I mean, really, it was homeschooling to a high degree. There were other schools at that time. I don't really discuss much of the early education of the founders. It was obviously quite basic. They learned how to read. They learned basic mathematics. They read stories, which were mostly based on older classical works. And then they went right as soon as they could into learning Latin and Greek and reading great authors. And that was not what you did in college. That was what you did in order to get into college. The requirements for Harvard, for example, at the time, which was one of many colleges of very high quality, you had to know many of the great authors in the original languages before you could enter. And so you have somebody, sort of paradigm case here would be Cotton Mather, who went to Harvard when he was 11 years old. And this was, I think that was after the time when they were required to speak Latin in the classroom, in the conversation of the classroom. But still, the requirements we would consider very extremely difficult and are not achieved really in the best of our classical schools. Even after a college, even a good classical college, you wouldn't be getting the kind of education that these people received.
It's truly amazing what they did at such a young age.
Well, and what's fascinating is that their formal education really didn't start until about 8. I mean, you see this in the Jesuits' Ratio Studiorum we talked about a month or two ago. Like, they really don't expect to get a student in a formal education setting until he's 8 or 9.
And then by the time they're 11, they're ready for college. I mean, that doesn't make any sense.
That is an exception.
Yeah.
You do have other founders. I think Alexander Hamilton went when he was 14. It wasn't.
But still.
I know. And it wasn't like you were just a complete oddball if you got in that early.
Right.
But it wasn't the norm.
But they were studying a more limited.
Yeah. Well, that's the thing. See, is that we have. If you look, we were talking today about what a day looks like in a classroom in classical education, and I ask you that because somebody else put something up on social media the other day talking about the way they see it, which looked way too complicated for me. We try to do so much, and one of the reasons they could do this is because they were focused, right? They're focused on great literature, history, literature, and then some pretty basic things. And, if you are able to discipline yourself as educators to do the most important things and get rid of the stuff that's not important or that really isn't academic. I mean, that's the problem with our schools today is we do all these non-academic things that we've got to do. Then you will have time to do things like this.
Well, did they go into, when they were 8 and went into a formal education, were they reading?
Yes.
They were studying at home informally,
well,
right?
And you think about it, the entertainment at home would have been reading books.
I was just thinking that. Like you think about Little House in the Big Woods, every night they sat down to read.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, that was their entertainment. And so kids naturally would have been inclined to want to learn to read because they want to participate in the family entertainment. And so, when they went 8 or 9 years old, they would have been...
They've really had their primary education by the time they come in.
That's right. But formal education really doesn't start until grammar school.
And you couldn't even get in to many schools, even, I'm sure, probably at the lower level, without taking an exam to make sure that you were ready to be there.
Right. And ages were not, like we were talking about this, right? Like you can enter Harvard at 11 or 14 or whatever. It was basically when you're ready,
right? When you can have the skills, the knowledge.
Yes, and it was much more like we say we have all these testing requirements, but really now what admits you into college is how old are you, right? And in large part, that's the deciding factor, as opposed to it being, well, you're proficient in X, Y, or Z. And I really think like Martin, you were talking about us wanting to teach so much. I think a lot of it is, over the past 100 years, educators haven't been willing to say, we don't need to teach that in our classrooms, right? And so all of a sudden, any new information, okay, well, we need to do this in our classrooms. It's right now, it's AI, right? Where, if we don't teach them this, they're not going to be able to function in the world. That assumption is the wrong assumption, right? You narrow your field of study. You get really good at those things, but you narrow it down into what the basic building blocks are for everything else. You master that, and everything else becomes much, much easier.
And that was part of the process in putting together Memoria Press's curriculum. That's what Cheryl was trying to do, is to get rid of all the extraneous stuff. We're
There's
doing
still a
geography,
lot left,
we're doing reading, we're doing math and in Latin. And I, at one point, this was when we were still forming the curriculum, the original curriculum, I gave a talk called the 4-subject curriculum. And because we didn't have all this, social studies. What the heck is that? I don't really know what it is. I mean, if you take out the things that they've stuck in there that don't belong in there, like history and literature, what really is left that you need to spend time on in school? So we're not focused. We completely lack focus as a society in what to expect from our children and what we need to teach them.
And the reality is these early Americans having such a depth in the classical world gave them, not for one, because all of the leaders in society were steeped in this in some way, shape, or form. And Martin, you mentioned that George Washington wasn't college educated, but also because of the culture, because of the atmosphere, he would have known a lot of this. I mean, that's just, if you're talking in conversation, you're going to hear these allusions. You're going to have to figure out what they're about. And so then when they went to form a nation, they had common examples that they could share, and they had lessons from that history. So we don't want to replicate that, or we do want to replicate that, right?
Yeah, and he got Washington got an 8th grade education, which at that time was probably better than a college education, to be honest about it.
Today's college education.
Yes, right. And because his father died. So,
but he did know the value of a classical education because everybody around him that he was working with had one.
He probably knew a good smattering of Latin, and he... there were some translations of texts at that time, which I think were getting around. But it was a learned society, and he was sort of an aristocrat, and aristocrats were one of the distinguishing features of aristocracy is education. And so he would have known a lot of things just because of the common discourse of the time.
This also reminded me, is it in this catalog as well, about Dancing with George Washington?
Oh, yes.
And just, how he would have fit in the aristocracy also because he was a man of the fine arts, right? The fact that he could fit in there.
That's Carol Reynolds'
article in here is fascinating. Just about how he was known for that, whereas he wasn't known for his mastery of the classical texts that other founding fathers were known for. But it was this whole culture that you're stewed in.
Yeah. And so when we went to figure out what form of government we wanted, back to a point you were making in terms of models, these are people who had read about the forms of government from ancient times and the Middle Ages and Enlightenment Europe. And so they were able to take the best from all of these and form a republic, which is a mixed form of government. And it mixes all the different forms of government that have been tried throughout history. And so they were familiar with those things. And then they start writing things themselves and discussing this, the Federalist Papers. And interestingly, I don't remember if I mentioned it in here, but colonial New England was one of the most educated societies ever to exist. Somebody made the remark that the Federalist Papers, which is if you try to read it now, it's very difficult to read. That was written for farmers in upstate New York. Okay, that's how literate these people were. So even the common person was a lot more educated than the common person now. Really better educated probably than a lot of educated people now.
And you also made the point, and this is interesting because, or you quote Tracy Lee Simmons saying that the founders, their instruction in wisdom and virtue came from two places, the pulpit and the schoolroom. And you talk about New England being very, very literate. And a huge part of that too was the desire to read the scriptures.
Absolutely, yes.
Right? That was a massive motivation for them. But they paired it with, it wasn't just that alone, but they paired it with the classics, saying, at this point, not only do we have faith, but then we've got all of this history of politics and
just wisdom
and human wisdom.
Right.
Yeah. And, there are some factions, some religious factions, which, they were very opposed to reading non-Christian authors, but they love Cotton Mather. And I always point out to them that he would probably, of all these people, was the best classically educated of them all.
Wasn't he a minister?
He was a minister. Absolutely he was. And so he's really a kind of a champion of a lot of the people who are likely to not like the very things that he learned. So I always point that out. It's just
that he studied the pagans.
He studied the pagans, and he knew their value, and wrote a defense of it called Magnalia Christi. That's a lot of that is just a defense of classical education.
And couldn't you argue that the founding, reading the pagans was extremely instrumental in them even having the knowledge base you talk about when you talk about the importance that it was that they knew history.
Right. I mean, just to form our government.
Right.
If they hadn't read the pagans, they wouldn't have known really what that model looks like.
You have to read Plutarch to know the story.
Yeah, exactly.
That's right. And Montesquieu also, and was very. Russell Kirk says in his book, The Roots of American Order, that I think it was the first or the second most commonly quoted author in the Federalist Papers and all the discussion that went on was Montesquieu. Which is kind of surprising, but they just read very widely in European literature in particular. And they were fairly varied in terms of religious belief, because you had Thomas Jefferson on one side, who was a little bit of a skeptic, and then other founding fathers who were a little more orthodox. But what they had imbibed was not only the great texts of pagan cultures, but a lot of the things that had been written in response to those books, and commentaries on these writings and all that, which were Christian. They were by that time very mixed in together, and any Christian education would have been completely classical, much more classical than we probably do now.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I thought was interesting towards the end of your article? You talk about how our students today have more resources available to them, though.
Jess, I wanted to bring this up.
Oh, please
because Martin's words are, for example, the educational resources available to colonial children were not only harder to find, but were of vastly inferior quality than what we have today.
I know, and it's kind of not. Yeah, so
it's a contradiction.
Okay, do you disagree with that?
Well,
I would just want you to defend that what we have today is of
Superior.
vastly
Okay,
superior
let me give you an
quality.
example. If I had Tanya look at the Blueback Speller as a phonics program, she would have all kinds of problems with it. There's certain things that we have been able to take advantage of those things and improve them over time. So in terms of the presentation of these things, it would be far easier for a child to learn phonics from our program than from the Blueback Speller. It's
right.
very-
It just
very
sounds
primitive.
like you're contradicting yourself because
No.
you talk about the value of old stuff, and then you say we have better stuff now.
Well, the
but you're not
content-
talking about the
I'm talking about
classics.
I'm talking about educational resources, not great books.
Okay, because
That makes
I'm
sense to
sitting
me,
here
'cause I was
thinking,
like, huh.
I was just at somebody's house the other day, and they started handing me copies of old books. I can't remember where I was.
Mm-hmm.
This is infuriating now, but they handed me, I think it was a copy maybe of Cicero from like 150 years ago. And I'm just sitting here thinking, like, that was really nice.
Mm-hmm.
It wasn't of inferior quality.
Mhm.
It was the font was smaller because they were saving on paper more and whatnot, but it was perfectly adequate for a great book.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm saying you're talking really about
Resources.
early resources
Because
to get
I think
them to that
they
level.
depended a lot more on the knowledge and expertise of the teacher.
Yes.
back then, because really, and books in themselves were quite rare. So you had to have teachers who had it up here, and I mean, I probably mentioned this before, but when my dad went to the little one-room schoolhouse, and all my aunts and uncles down the road from where he grew up in the hills of South Carolina, they only had 3 books. I asked him what math program they use. He said, "I didn't have a math program. We didn't have books. Our teacher knew arithmetic, and she taught it to us." So there's a lot of that too.
Right.
It was knowledge being passed down from person to person, not necessarily through books.
It's fascinating because I know I've brought this up before, but I had a conversation with a friend years and years ago, and she was a math teacher, and we were just talking about how we teach, and she said, "Well, I'm convinced that the students actually learn best from each other than from me as teacher." And I was like, wait. So my view of education is that there's this long chain of historical knowledge of where humanity has amassed this knowledge, and it's up to the older to teach the younger and pass that information on. If you cut the adult out, then you're making them start from the beginning
blind leading
again,
the
right?
blind.
If your kids are going to teach themselves, do they get retirement benefits? And
Yeah. But this is interesting because you're talking about the fact that we have better resources now, which in some ways makes it easier for somebody like Abraham Lincoln to be self-taught, right? Because they can pick it up and they can kind of work through it. Whereas before books are widely available, before you can even get your hands on them, there is this culture of we are going to pass it down because we know if we don't pass it down, it's going to be lost. Whereas that imperative does not exist as much today because we're just inundated with all of this
Right.
information.
Do you think
part of
there's
the
been
reason our resources are better now than they were then is that we have resources now.
and
they
maybe
didn't
do
have
you mean
resources
like
then,
more
you know?
accessible? Is that what it is? Like
Yes.
better meaning maybe not superior, but better meaning more accessible.
Well, but also
Also superior.
yeah, insofar as like we now have more information about like when you try to teach phonics in a certain way. I mean, phonics is a great example of like what works and what doesn't work, right? And so we're now going to try to give them something that works as opposed to just trying to pass it on through osmosis.
Yeah, if you look at the history of phonics, it's really only fairly recently, historically speaking, that we really got down to a method that is really good. There was letter sound correspondences, but as anyone who's tried to do a phonics program knows, it's not just letter sound correspondences. It's blends, it's it's all kinds of things. And that's why there's several different versions of phonics, So we didn't have many resources at all, which is why we didn't have very good ones. We just didn't have any in a lot of places.
Makes sense. Going back to the founders, I know in your article you mention, and we've talked about this before, with even their history, the fact that they read the pagans helped them shape some of the forming of the government. Can you give other examples about how, maybe direct connections between their education and some of the things that they created? Or,
well, I mean, they were all reading, Plutarch and Montesquieu and Aristotle and all these works. And then they were debating them among themselves, right? That's part of what the Federalist Papers does. And so, I don't know what to say about that other than they were able to do that because they knew the works. And we now have these political discussions that are done in complete ignorance of the things that the people who put together our form of government were quite familiar with. And that really, I think, diminishes the level of discourse we have now, because they talk about stuff that the founding fathers would have said, well, okay, yeah, well, that was tried by Sparta or whatever, and it was a disaster. Well, this person doesn't know that because he hasn't read any history. He hasn't read any great books on politics of ancient times, so they don't know that. It's part of it is just trying not to duplicate the errors of your predecessors. And if you don't know anything about your predecessors, it's far easier to duplicate those errors.
I don't know about this personally, but I would think also that we've not just our government, but that we've also probably gotten a lot of military help from past histories of wars.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah. I mean, if you read Thucydides, you the founding fathers knew very well what they were getting into when they revolted against King George. This was not a dreamy, we're gonna form our own country. They knew it was going to be dire. They knew they were gonna communities would end up in starvation, that people would die, because Thucydides makes that very, very plain. And what war will drive you to.
And down to the battlefield level, I'm trying to remember, it's in the movie Patton, and this is a true story, when I can't remember which battle it was, but Patton thought it was Rommel on the other side, the Germans. This was in North Africa during World War II. And Patton thought he was facing Rommel, and he was just, he wanted this. And later found out that Rommel wasn't there. He'd been called back to Germany. But Patton there was some particular Roman battle that he was thinking of that this was similar to, and he was maneuvering his troops on the basis of what he knew about this ancient battle. And history is there to learn from. And if we don't teach it, we don't learn from it, and we just keep making the same mistakes, and we don't progress because of it.
And I think one thing, in some ways, a less tangible thing of where you see this education coming out and what the founding fathers did, is particularly in their character and the way they acted, their ideals. And the example that comes to my mind is actually John Adams, when he arrives at the White House, or I think they were in the middle of building the White House when he arrives. And he is just absolutely flabbergasted by the amount of people that are coming asking for government jobs and asking for handouts from him as the executive. And because his mind was so steeped in politics as an act of service from Cicero, that it just didn't even cross his mind that this is what people would expect they could get, because he's like, my goal as running to be president is to serve the people and not have people that are looking for their own ends, right? Like you should want to get into the government jobs in order to help people. And he's like, that's not what it was.
Right.
And he, you could. I was reading his who did his biography. You help me, Martin. John Adams, the McCulloch, David McCulloch.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, it's a very colorful picture of kind of when from Adams' letters of him kind of writing home about this
book,
and just because that's his view of what government was founded on the best of the ancients, right? And not just what it does for me.
And Adams was very much a Latinist, as opposed to Jefferson, who was sort of a Grecophile. And they have letters going back and forth, sort of taunting each other on this. But, I'm thinking, how does that compare to like notes passing today between politicians? Don't think it's quite the same thing.
Emails, not quite.
Emails, no, they're not being. Well, and the other thing too is you have this difference. In a sense, there's kind of two ways to do this, and somebody's written a book about this, comparing Thomas Jefferson's education to Abraham Lincoln's education. Because was Abraham Lincoln classically educated?
Well, he was
No, not
self-taught.
really. He was self-taught.
Do we know what he read?
Well, then here's the comparison is that Jefferson was widely learned. His library becomes the Library of Congress. He donates it, right?
And it's beautiful.
Yes, and he's read these books. Very widely educated. Lincoln was very deeply educated in just a few things, just a few books: the King James Bible, Shakespeare, primarily, and Euclid. And it's from Euclid
It's interesting.
he gets his argument against slavery, because equality plays a part in geometry. And he actually apparently got the idea from geometry of the equality of the races. So, but it's, because I wrestle with this sometimes. I try to read so much and I'm thinking, should I spend more time with these few books rather than try to cover in a more shallow way all of these other books? Now, these guys, the way they were educated and in their time where you had much more time to read, they could do both. But that's harder to do now. So which way do we go?
That is a lifelong conundrum.
I think you can still read widely without reading everything
Shallowly.
and without reading shallowly. Right. And so, and it's a matter of discernment of whether this book is worth the deep read or whether this book is worth me knowing what his argument is, but not necessarily being a deep read. And going back to this idea of, the family entertainment or what your entertainment was, their entertainment was, these books of massive cultural import, right? They were still fun, still enjoyable, but they were ones that had formed and were continuing to form the culture. And whereas now you go read something for fun, your British murder mysteries, my Graham Greene, right? Like as important Graham Greene is to the formation of my life, I don't have a community of people that are formed by Graham Greene.
That's right.
Right.
And they really didn't have almost anything in the way of children's literature. Children's literature only comes in the 19th century, the late 19th century as we know it. And even then it's pretty much limited to English. Now you had other cultures in Europe, for example, that had fairy tales, Grimm, Perrault, Hans Christian Andersen, you had those, but before that, it's all oral. There was storytelling, but it wasn't from a book. It was just people told stories, and that's kind of partly how you were even, basically educated, right?
And they read scripture.
Yes,
as a family,
which was Paul had pointed out earlier was the motivation in New England, certainly, particularly for learning how to read, so that you could read the Word of God.
So I love your point at the end where you say we could also pessimistically say we lack their fortitude. So we can't do this kind of education now because we lack fortitude. But then you point out that fortitude is a benefit that we receive from a classical education. We learn fortitude. We hopefully are teaching our students fortitude by making them take 10 years of Latin.
Yeah, just disciplining your mind.
Right.
Right. Yeah, I mean, there's so many things we do now that just don't help us in any way. And you look at, the reason, we've always said this, the reason we learn Latin and, Greek starting later on, is partly simply to organize our brain and to discipline ourselves. It takes discipline to learn Latin. And you need subjects like that in your curriculum, and you need them at the center of the curriculum, which is where it is in ours.
Absolutely. That's a good note to end on, I think, to keep going, to encourage us to persevere in the things that are difficult as the school year begins, especially.
Yes.
It's going to get hard soon. Is there anything we left out that from the article? It was a good one, Martin. And this whole piece, the whole magazine has full of articles about the founding fathers. We've got, you mentioned Dr. Carroll's article about Washington. There are a couple more too. We've got one from Mitchell.
And one from Tracy Lee Simmons.
Right. Yes.
And so if people don't have the classical teacher, they can go to memoriapress.com.
That's right.
And then what do they do?
If they click on catalog on the menu bar,
Click
then you
on
can
catalog.
you can either view it digitally there, or you can request a physical catalog.
Yeah,
We'll
and
send it to you.
if you want to learn, we should say this, if you want to learn more about these men, okay, which is different from learning what they learned, right?
True.
Right.
But to learn about them because they are inspiring. That's part of the reason for history and having heroes in history. David McCullough's books are absolutely delightful.
1776.
Yes.
And then the John Adams, to me, were the very best.
They are. And there's, H.W. Brands does a good biography on Benjamin Franklin, and there are others, but I think McCullough, and if you do like you do anything else, you look at the one author, and then you plug it into Amazon, and they will give you other authors who are also good. So, but I'd start with David McCullough.
I would too. He's very readable.
Yes, absolutely.
Fun.
He brings them alive.
Yeah. Perfect. Well, thank you for a great discussion, everybody, Core 4. And thank you for joining us. We will be back next time. Thanks for joining us today on Classical Etc. by Memoria Press. If you like what you heard, please like, subscribe, or share this episode or comment. We love to hear your questions and your comments. If you want to learn more about Memoria Press, please go to memoriapress.com. This has been Classical Etc. We're so glad you joined us, and we'll see you next time.